Well, like you said, sometimes you have to get yourself out of your own hole. I mean, if you're getting everything from everybody, you know. I mean, I see people every day in my life that stand on the corner, throwing a couple dollars, you know, for food, gas, or whatever they want. You know. I'm just saying is, I mean, if you gotta humble yourself, you gotta hold from the, you know, life is gonna humble you if you play it the wrong way. I mean, we all have to a certain point, but that's what it comes down to. Yeah, I mean, Sue's brother is in the same this too. I don't know if he's gotten out of it, he's down on the work. He was down for a while, you know, and he didn't have anything, he didn't have a job, he had a hernia, he couldn't work because of that, didn't have insurance that had the operation. Just because of lifestyle. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, he's that's Bible. And so he can make do try to tell anybody everything, you know, just so he can have money, get money. And that's what we're talking about. If he gets money from suicide, $40, he's getting $40 from you, he's trying to get $70 from him, you know, without tax money, they're walking away with $160. A week, you know, why would you have to go out and get a job? You can do that. And I don't know what his rate is. I don't know if he has to pay for bills, you know. Well, the Julie's got to be working with you. Because I know that you can't pay food what it is. You got to pay. Should be paying over $300 some dollars. We'll just keep praying for him. Yes. Yes. More about you thing. So we're just waiting for them to, tell us that they're blessed, you know. And, we don't push the issue, you know. Well, yes, she's doing good. You know, she hasn't called or anything about any of that. So I think that we're doing right to take all the sharp minds from the police department. So she can deal with butter.
Who has got the news on in the background?
It could be me. Paul's having Pentecostal church.
Well, we'll take that. That's not bad. Let me get some light on. I'm look like I'm Hogan in the middle of the night.
Does that feel like the
All she has to do is the button and then run it through 2 or 3 times to charge. You remember those, you know? And so
Let me see if I can get some quiet in the background. PT.
less preaching in the background?
Hey, Dana, I just learned from a great friend of mine that his daughter is going to Rhodes College next year to swim on their swim team.
Good.
That's so exciting. She's very excited about it.
I'm excited every time someone goes there. You know,
My old friend, Bill Trout.
oh, yes, he was. Is he a family member?
No, he was the first president when I started teaching at Belmont.
Right.
So lovely. I loved him.
He comes from the rainbow, not the brown trout side of the family, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
I I think he was a 2T trout, TR.
I think he is too.
He was a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous small college president, in my opinion. And Susan, you can tell your friend that my son had a terrific experience being a D3 athlete at Rhodes. Just a terrific, terrific experience.
Excellent.
A lot of us online there went to Rhodes. Well, not a lot. What is it? 1, 2, 3. Don, didn't you go up there? Didn't you go? Who else? Dana and I went there. I mean, so anyway.
Well, I just didn't know that.
Before you get started,
There weren't that
it's
many
flooding
Rhodes
out
people.
here in Bellevue, by the way.
I'm right here with you.
It's
How
flooding
close to the
Bellevue?
flooding are you, Sue Tully?
I am, so we live in Boone Trace, which is,
Yeah, I know where that is. Yeah.
connected to Riverwalk and all of that. We were,
Okay.
we got hit in the big flood. So this always makes us a little nervous, but
Well, see, the house where we are is on, it's right off of Morton Mill. And
Oh, golly.
with the 4th
Oh.
Street Inn, and the golf course is just down the street. And if it floods down there, we can't get out. And the river, we're on the corner. So right across the street and down the hill, there's water, and the water's over the sidewalk and partly up the hill. So I always go into hysterics every time it rains, just about, So anyway, but that's why I just wondered how everybody was doing. I don't think any of the rest of y'all live near the water. So anyway, I'll shut up now.
I'm right there with you.
The creek on Roland Road almost went over its banks a few days ago. Yeah, you saw it, Carol. I don't know if it rains all night tonight and all day tomorrow, it may go over the other side of the bank. I don't know.
Guy, you ready?
I am ready. And Sue, before you start, 2 things. I had somebody watch your class from last week and said just how wonderful it was, but wondered if it would be wise for me to cut off the first conversation we had prior to you begin teaching, lest anybody hear the concerns raised just amongst us
Oh, yeah,
about the
cut that
direction
off.
of Belmont. And
Did y'all-
so I'm taking care of that. We're
Thank you.
snipping off that, lest anyone would hear that. And
Yeah. Big brother watching, baby.
yeah, exactly. We bragged about you with
Oh, shoot.
Greg Jones, and thought he did well. And
Oh, good.
You should see
And-
the new beginning that he spliced on. Boy, you look great in that new beginning.
exactly, Hunter. Right? Yeah.
That's good.
But
thought Greg Jones
he did a good job building a bridge to Belmont, and so it was good week. But we were able to celebrate you with him, so that was a good thing. Yeah.
Let's see how that goes. They lifted our mask mandate today.
Did they?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I'm here and you're here. Are y'all ready to finish this book?
We are. What lovely writing in this section. Oh my
I
Lord.
know. Isn't it lovely?
I gotta say, one of my favorite parts still is that when the story about the mules, and when he goes out to see the mule and he says the mule looked up at him as if he were a Christian.
That's right.
I'm waiting for my dogs to look at me as if they're Christians.
Well,
We're
then
working
you
on
are.
it. We're working on it.
But
Well,
when he comes to the stone lips, they cast the mules aside.
yeah, but then later we know that they got him back somehow, right?
Right.
They're here at the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, y'all. Let's talk about the ending of this novel. It's so interesting, and I'm glad you all sort of honed in on how beautiful the writing is, particularly at the end. It's, for me, such a fascinating book, because when I get to the end, I'm kind of sad it's over.
Yeah.
Even though it seems as though there's not a lot happening. Yes?
Mhm.
So, go ahead. Did somebody have a comment? Sorry. All right. Well, let's talk about, I think let's get to the great diocese and make some observations about I don't know, do we want to call it the end of the Archbishop's journey? It's really fascinating because critically, a number of observers have noted that as you move to the end, the novel becomes softer. Do you believe that? Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
What do you think that means? It becomes softer.
I think that it relates to the character traits of the men. I mean, you've got the bishop who's let go of his companion, that he's, and I love that he says we can't separate the mules. You have to take both of them.
I know, I love that.
I mean, I'm going, oh, but there's no criticism. Very little criticism of what's been done or hasn't been done.
Very good. I've heard this also described as, for the first, 3/4 of the novel, the novel is epic in terms of all that kind of goes on in the annexing and the beginnings of the settling of this territory into this thing called, the United States, but that it goes from epic to elegy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's that, Guy?
It's bigger than epic. It's it's making a point. I thought about at the end of it, the notion that I've lived long enough to see these evils be undone, the slavery and the Navajo get their property back. It's more than just an epic sweep. There's a kind of a final benediction pronounced on all of this, elegiac that way.
Good word.
Yeah.
I agree. And, an elegy is usually a poem of reflection. And as you move towards the last quarter of the novel, that is what you kind of watch as Latour is reflecting on this life. And it's also, an elegy is also a lament for the dead. And it's fascinating because the ending, I think you can argue, is elegiac. The question becomes, is it elegy before he dies, right? That you go from this serious reflection to the meeting of his death. And it happens very sort of quietly and almost matter-of-factly, as if, this has been the direction of the novel and, of course, our own lives from the beginning.
But part of the elegy is his relationship with his former associate.
Yes.
There's a lot of elegy in there.
Absolutely. So let's look at, I'm on page 210. I do want to note December night, because it is often cited as a really important section of the novel. And then we will get into book 8. So in December Night, you have the introduction of this new female character called Old Sada. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
what-
fabulous. The
yeah,
section
what's
is
this about?
fabulous.
I'm bringing this up because I think it goes to some of what we had said earlier, and particularly that beautiful explanation Guy gave of what is perhaps miraculous or divine in the everyday sort of connections and interactions of these people. So let's just look at it for a second and see what you all make of it. In the deep doorway of the sacristy, he saw a crouching figure, a woman he made out, and she was weeping bitterly. He raised her up and took her inside. It was an old Mexican woman called Sada, who was slave in an American family. That's a great line, right? They were Protestants, very hostile to the Roman Church, and they did not allow her to go to Mass or to receive the visits of a priest. She was carefully watched at home. But she had gathered her courage for this heroic action. What's her heroic action?
She sneaks out to go to the church.
Yes, that she puts herself in a very vulnerable position in order to get to the church. And it says on the bottom of 213, he began to light the tapers before the Virgin. Old Sada fell on her knees and kissed the floor. She kissed the feet of the Holy Mother, the pedestal on which they stood, crying all the while. 19 years, Father, 19 years since I have seen the holy things of the altar. All that is past, Sada. You have remembered the holy things in your heart. We will pray together. So what do you make of this little interaction? Because I think it underscores some pretty significant things that we have talked about and a few that we haven't.
It's an interesting relationship between the Protestant and Catholic.
Yes.
And it's been so Catholic. And there've been a few references to, at one point he says, I got along just fine with the Protestants. The Indians said the Americans are all infidels, all those kinds of things. So we haven't had a whole lot of information about the Protestants in this territory. But obviously they were there and a presence.
Absolutely. And part of Willa Cather was a Protestant. And part of what she's trying to do, I think, is bring in another disparate voice into this conversation of culture and different cultures. One of the things historically that's fascinating is that, you know, in the middle of the 19th century, America, as we think of it and defined it at that time, was predominantly Protestant and did not have favorable feelings about Catholicism at all. And in particular, the sort of more mystic elements of Catholicism and the rituals of Catholicism. And so it's interesting here that she would have this little scene where the Sada, the old Mexican woman, is enslaved to a Protestant family that would forbid her to have any connection with this church. And so it's a fascinating little moment because, again, you have this series of clashing, sometimes always different cultures. But then you have the bishop saying, all that is past, you have remembered the holy things in your heart. Why do you think that line matters in terms of the character?
The character of the bishop?
Yeah.
Well, he's learned a lot.
Yes, like what?
Well, like he's run across so many different cultures, people, Indians, you know, some good, some bad. And he's realized something about how to, what's the word? Be compassionate.
Wonderful. And as we get close to the end of the novel, remember one of the consistent questions is how you think the Archbishop has developed over the course of the novel. There are moments in which, you know, he seems so European, and particularly French in his relationships with both the Native American population and the Mexican population, always seemingly wanting to learn, but also a little apart. And one of the things that he has consciously tried to do in this diocese is bring these people back to the way he thinks the Catholic Church should work. Yes?
Mhm.
But here you have this very human moment where he makes this gesture saying, you remembered this in your heart.
And that was enough.
And maybe that was enough, because later, never, as he afterward told Father Valent, had it been permitted him to behold such deep experience of the holy joy of religion as on that pale December night. Go ahead, Guy.
I think one of the things I think the juxtaposition of how he's feeling when he goes out there and the encounter with this person. I'm going to speak as a pastor for a moment. You know, there have been plenty of times in 35 years of ministry where I wasn't feeling it.
Yep.
And it was the encounter with faithful lay people that renewed often my sense of wonder at the divine, the reality of this. You know, part of what I'm thinking about doing in some writing project is tell some of those stories. It struck me as something very true in my own experience of the mystery of how God works with the faithfulness of simple lay people that remind us that these holy things that we touch are absolutely transformative in the lives of people of God. I'm glad you raised this chapter, because it just, to me, all of it was beautiful and really pitched well.
I mean, there's no way I could articulate that better. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, it's fascinating if you go to the last page of that chapter, 218. Remember, he wants to give her the cloak, right?
Yep.
But knows that, well, she makes clear she cannot have that. And so he happily, Father Latour bethought him of a little silver medal with a figure of the Virgin he had in his pocket. He gave it to her, telling her that it had been blessed by the Holy Father himself. Now she would have a treasure to hide and guard, to adore while her watchers slept. Ah, he thought, for one who cannot read or think, the image, the physical form of love. That's so beautiful. Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
That he gives her this not just human and spiritual kind of gesture and moment of communion, but that he marks that with this little medal that she will have to hide. And he sees that moment as so spiritually profound and uplifting, when in other contexts that would have annoyed him, right? This idea that you know, she hasn't been in the church in 20 years, she might not be doing it right, and now he says it's enough. It's enough. Now, I also want to bring,
Sue?
go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's exactly, when you said doing it right, that's exactly, it's the clash between the formal religion and the religion of the soul. Because I mean, being brought up a good Catholic boy, you're gone from the church for 19 years. That's a mortal sin for every Sunday you've missed times 19 years. We're talking about a lot of sin in there. And that would, I think, initially have been difficult for him to deal with. But he sees the start from where you are and move forward.
Very good. I'm writing something down. Okay, beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And so when you think about the progression of this character, you have to make final evaluations as you move towards the end. I do think it's important that we underscore this note that he makes to himself about this idea of love, what love is, what love means. Because even though the novel is called Death Comes for the Archbishop, there's this really interesting relationship with the emphasis on death, and at the same time, the stress on life and love. And so it's a fascinating thing that even though if you go through this journey, so much of the conflict and violence and difficulties between these people learning to live together, we do get to a space where Latour's real focus as an old man seems to be moving more and more towards love and reflection. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yes.
So several things come to him besides death. And one of them is a realization about love and compassion and his fellow, and what it really means to be holy, what God really means to him.
Yes. So can we do this for a couple of minutes? If we had to define how love works in this novel, how would you define it?
Presence, really being able to be present.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
Well, there's a love of, in the native cultures, there are loves of certain things, ideas, beliefs, things. There are things that are loved in other ways by other parts of the, culture. And somehow at the end, I feel like there's not so much conflict among all those things, particularly in his mind.
Good. Yeah, good. So here is what we have to figure out as we move to the end. So if his goal as a person, and in particular a priest, if his goal is to reflect love, teach love, is there a way we can articulate the mission of the Christian church beyond building things? So how do you describe it, Guy? How do you describe it in your life, or in your life as a pastor? What kind of love are you trying to teach anyway?
Acceptance.
Yes.
Well, I think different kind of love, certainly, community, and this, some of you have heard me talk about fictive kin before, an anthropological term. And I think of these guys who, still have these ties back home to families, but don't have any family there. And so how do they work as family one to another? And that whole chapter, as he's remembering this long history and how he needs to call him back because he just needs him close.
Yeah.
But I think, love for the people and this desire to build something, it's not, it'd be really interesting to hear other people's point of view, but that whole conversation where he takes him out to see the stone.
Oh yeah, we're getting
And,
ready to do that.
The bishop, you see way in the distance. And, my first church out of seminary, I was called to build something. And
What?
it wasn't about me, but it was about a community that would be there long after me, that would know something about God's grace and one another. And so in, some sense, I had to have energy to gather the people and find the resources and all of that. But it wasn't the thing itself. It was what happened through that place. And yet, if you build something, you want it to be beautiful, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God. So I think it's complicated, and certainly I was just a simple pastor, not a archbishop. So the scale would probably be a little bit different, but I think, and this, I'm going to get this French guy to send his son out. So it's as nice as the church is, back home. Golly, I see, I'm not, I'm empathetic to all of that motivation in him. And I'm certainly willing to give him a pass on what his motivations are, because I really do think it's not about the place itself, but what happens there. I mean, you may not know this, Sue, but the sign out in front of Westminster says Westminster Presbyterian Church gathers here.
Yes.
And so it's a deep sense of what does it mean that we're a community here? It's not Donovan's church. It's not Guy's church. It's not even Dana Brooks's church. I mean, it's God's church. These people gathered here. That it's a beautiful building. I mean, I sort of like that. My aesthetics are happy. God would never call me to an ugly church. I know that. But I mean, the ties to the homeland and how energizing a good dinner, a good bottle of wine is to the other priest. But they are actually, doing something remarkable, that they're out here on the edge of the world, making this happen. So
But he says he doesn't want to go back. He doesn't want to go back to where he came from, right? Which says something about the pull of what? The people, the mission, the something on him, where he could not long for what was passed.
Very good. I think
There's one other, I'd
I was
like
getting
to
ready to
offer up
call on you.
a little different view.
Go
And I
ahead.
think it's very important on what you raised on the old woman coming into the church. And the question that I think theologically is raised is whether it's possible to have access to God's love without the physical representation.
Beautiful.
And what was occurring is what still is part of the cathedral today is the presence of La Conquistadora, the image that was brought by de Vargas when he came back and took over for Spain again. And even the power today among the Hispanic, those who are not necessarily of the magisterium church, but of the indigenous Hispanic church, is the need really to have access physically in order to have theoretically or symbolically or even elegetically access to God's love. And every year, La Conquistadora is brought out as it has been done, and it was done by Archbishop Latour at the very beginning, because I think what he discovered, contrary to the way he had been trained in Europe, in his exchanges, particularly with the native priests, that is the Hispanic priests, but it also has its corollary in the indigenous religion, that is of the Kiva religion, is the necessity for people to be able to know God's love because there is a physical remembrance, a physical object which permits remembrance. And hence the importance of him giving the blessed medal, for example, to the old lady to carry.
I think you are absolutely right. And it's one of the most interesting questions because do you think, okay, I think you are dead on here. Is this idea of a physical reminder or something physical that you can access or touch, do you think this is particular to the Catholic religion or not?
Well, it was very much in contrast to what the Presbyterians were preaching at that time.
Correct.
Because what was brought essentially from Reformed theology is that we are able to have access through our mind. And so the emphasis for the Presbyterians was on education. And there was this tremendous conflict then between both the magisterium and the Hispanic religions versus what the Presbyterians were doing. And I say Presbyterians because it turned out to be the dominant Protestant religion at that formative time. And one of the things that's most precious to me is having been part of the writing of the Concordat, which we signed in 2008, I think, trying to lay aside then the animosity between Catholics and Presbyterians and forgive one another for the kind of viciousness that occurred, that is Catholic captures in how the old lady was treated by the Protestants. If you even had access to the priest, it meant that you were contaminated and therefore you were not of right mind, therefore you could not be saved.
Correct.
And that kind of tension is still played out today.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you point that out because I absolutely agree. And then when you bring the tensions of other Protestant denominations into that conversation, right? So, for example, many more evangelical kinds of churches believe that the access is through their hearts So the emphasis is not on education. And then you have more and more tensions playing against one another. And that's why I brought this up, because I think as you move to the end of the novel, we do, or you do as a reader, have to come to terms with this cathedral, right? That he wants to build. And I love the way the whole thing is set up. I'm on page 238, the chapter Gold Under Pike's Peak. This is the one that Guy was just referencing, where he is showing Father Valent the hill. And he says, this is the only one of its kind. That hill, Blanchette, is my cathedral, which is perfect phrasing, right? Because is it the hill and all that the hill represents or encompasses or incorporates, or is it that physical building and space? And Valent even sort of pushes him on this, which I love. When I look at this rock, I can almost feel the Rhone behind me. The bishop sat down on a boulder, still looking up at the cliff. It is the stone I have always wanted, and I found it quite by chance. Oh, such things are never accidents, Jean, but it will be a long while before you can think of building. Not so very long, I hope. I should like to complete it before I die, if God so wills. This chapter is so loaded. And what I mean is, I think, and this for me is the genius of Willa Cather, because these passages, depending on your own perspective, can be interpreted in so many different ways. Because, first of all, it is at this point that we know that somewhere in the Archbishop's mind is this forward thinking. He knows eventually he's going to die. He wants this cathedral done before he goes. And remember, at one point, and I love this line too, when he's sick, and he says to his friend, I shall not die of a cold, my son. I shall die of having lived.
It's a wonderful line.
But now, and I'm so glad that we've kind of gone here. This thing he wants to build, does he, Mr. Davidson, does he fundamentally believe that that's the physical thing he has to leave behind for the people?
One of the very interesting things from a native, that is the Kiva religion, is that that particular cliff, and you can see it very visibly at the train station, which is called Lamy today. It's south of Santa Fe, is the site of one of their most sacred caves. And is it possible that Archbishop LeMay somehow or another got infected by Kiva religion, that he saw the special color that is part? But from their perspective, the reason for the imperative of the cathedral, and not just the cathedral, but that the cathedral was built from the stone from that bluff, is because it is the protector of the sacred objects.
My
And
goodness.
what happened in, I think it was around from 26 to 28, when the cathedral was being renovated again, a major conflict broke out on whether they could go back and open up again that cliff in order to get the stone for the replacement for the needed renovations. it was finally agreed that yes, they could, but who were the main opponents of opening up the cliff? Protestants.
Mhm.
I mean, this is so delicious. Am I right? I mean, you know, this is the kind of stuff I love. So this is such an interesting chapter on so many levels. And look what Valent says to him. You plan far ahead. Well, that is what a bishop should be able to do. As for me, I see only what is under my nose. But I had no idea you were going in for fine building when everything about us is so poor and we ourselves are so poor. Here's Guy talking, but the cathedral is not for us, Father Joseph. We build for the future. So you have to figure this out as a reader. Is Lemmy Latour the visionary who is able to work from this place, this stone, and leave this physical reminder, this physical vehicle for the people he serves? Or, and there are some who read this, or is he never able to go beyond his own human vanity? And Valent is the friction, right? Who goes, why are we doing this when we're poor? This whole place is poor. But Latour says it's not about that. It's about something bigger. In his quest or in his journey, another thing you have to contend with is this relationship, in the sense that, is it also his own ego that won't allow him for a while to let the bishop go, to let Valent go? It's a weird separating these two men in this book, don't you think?
Yes.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you how the critics read it, and then you all can explain it to me.
Sure.
He wants Valent with him because he's fundamentally lonely and he's getting older, he's not as mobile. But Valent is the worker bee, yes? He wants to be out there, he wants to be doing things, and there's some resentment that starts to build. So here's my religious question, Pastor. Does he have to renounce Valent, let him go, in order to complete his own journey?
Hmm.
I don't know the answer.
Sue, Valent and Latour reminded me a little bit of Mary and Martha.
Hank, what did you just say?
I said that Latour and Valent remind me a little bit of Mary and Martha.
Oh, I thought you said me and Martha, and I was going, who's Martha? Oh, why? How, Hank? Very good.
Because you got the doer, and then you got the one that's focusing on, I guess, the more spiritual side of things. And you know, that's, I mean, that dichotomy probably goes back in the church a long, long way. Yeah.
Is reminder a big enough word that the church is a reminder?
Or it can be that physical thing, like the locket, that physical
Right, that you can hold.
avenue or vehicle through which to access God.
Mhm.
But
One of the
what,
things,
ahead.
Sue, that is, I think Heather doesn't lift this up, but it's part of the common knowledge that at least the readers in that area would just assume, is that the church that is to be replaced is made of adobe bricks. And of course, they wash away. And like the magisterium being washed away after the Pueblo revolt, the imperative for Archbishop Latour, Lamy, was to build that which can't be washed away.
Yeah.
And the cathedral then becomes the place not only for the sacred objects, which give one access to God, but the protector. And it's amazing today, even today, the amount that their budget has to be spent on security.
Wow.
Wow.
Because the wardrobe of La Conquistadora is just, it's unbelievable, because the faithful have been building clothes for her for now how many hundreds of years.
I know.
And they are poor as they can possibly be, and yet they invest on diamonds and emeralds for her necklace.
There's something really weird about that to me.
What is it? Say it again.
When
Say
I
that. What's
was
weird?
years ago, I was in Spain on a tour, and we saw several churches. And one of the things that the church people wanted to show us was their treasure room. And I finally said, I see so much poverty around here, I don't want to see your treasure room. And that was my reaction. I don't know whether it was good or bad, but it was a very strong reaction that I had, that I just didn't want to compare those two things.
Yes. You're a good Protestant.
Exactly.
I was not gonna say that, but that's what I was thinking.
Well, I mean, I can't help it. I've been one for 84 years. It's been a long time.
I totally get what you're saying, because that would be my reaction too. That's my Baptisty reaction, right?
Yeah.
But that's one of those sort of fundamental undercurrents in the novel, is what is of value to a particular culture, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
And-
the whole chapter about the devotion to Mary.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
What role does beauty play in all of this? I mean, I think it does play a role.
Well,
Sue,
I
can
think
I
it does
pivot to a sentence that just stopped me in its tracks?
Yes.
I'm on page 232.
Okay.
Traveling with Eusebio was like traveling with the landscape made human.
Oh,
Oh my Lord, what a fabulous sentence.
mhm.
So, Guy, if we give Latour all of our best credits, is then the church he wants to build and has built that? In other words, hold on, let me find the sentence again.
232 toward the top.
Yeah, I love that whole section.
Yeah.
Where he says, since this was exactly Jacinto's procedure, Father Latour judged that just as it was the white man's way to assert himself in any landscape, to change it, make it over a little, at least to leave some mark of memorial of his sojourn. It was the Indian's way to pass through a country without disturbing anything, to pass and leave no trace. So one of the fascinating questions about this church is, the human motivation, the religious motivation, the spiritual motivation for this church? Is he at best trying to use the landscape for the humans, right?
Mhm.
That are native to this area? Or is it some mark of memorial to him? Because
I think it starts out that way. He starts out talking about it's an extension of myself, it's an extension of my ministry. But he changes, and I think at the end, that's not what he says.
okay, very good. That is a very strong possibility. I find it fascinating that he has to have a French architect, though. Don't you?
And he doesn't want any Ohio bricks.
Well, he doesn't want an ugly church.
That's
Yes,
right.
he does not.
That's
Does
right.
that not matter to you? I mean, that all of these questions start turning upon themselves. Do you get what I'm saying? Because I don't know that we have to completely eschew Latour's idea of beauty either.
Mhm.
Well, I think, I mean, Guy says he doesn't want to build an ugly church. I don't think it's necessarily a mark of great ego to want to.
But it's certainly a mark of our humanness, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Come on. Because remember at the beginning when he's telling us those little ugly wooden sculptures of Mary are the most beautiful in some way, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, he does, get his cathedral. And I do want to look at the very, very end and make just a couple of statements before we leave Willa-Cather. And this goes back to something that Guy had said earlier about perhaps in the best possible way what the mission of the Christian church is trying to accomplish is these expressions of love, the love of people to people, the love of God to humanity, the love of humanity to God. And if the church is actually for the community, it's something that he leaves behind for the community, then the very last paragraph makes so much more sense to me.
Mhm.
Because when the cathedral bell tolled just after dark, the Mexican population of Santa Fe fell upon their knees, and all the American Catholics as well. Many others who did not kneel prayed in their hearts. Eusebio and I don't know how to say this, Tasuki boys went quietly away to tell their people. And the next morning, the old Archbishop lay before the high altar in the church he had built. If anybody could pull this whole thing together in one sentence, that is what she does at the end. And I don't know, and I don't think she would want all of these questions resolved.
Mhm.
She is presenting them to you, but she is also consciously trying to create a legend out of Latour/Lamy. And a legend is, like so many of the things we've said about the church, a legend changes and shifts. It serves the community it represents. It is a living thing, just as the church should be a living thing. Can we agree on that? Now, before we end, I want to say just a special shout out thank you to Mr. Davidson, because I could not have navigated all of that special knowledge in the way that he did. So thank you very much. I'd like to have you on my team, my trivia team. And I don't know, Guy, what next?
Wow, that's a good question. I have Katie Rosenson texting me, advocating for Handmaid's Tale.
Oh,
And I told her that, we have some who have suggested that that's not something they want to take on. So we need to find something for next fall.
I'm thinking Winesburg, Ohio.
Okay.
It is beautiful. It is a book by Sherwood Anderson that was
Yeah.
written like in 1918.
Yeah.
It's got some Presbyterians in it.
oh my goodness.
It's a beautiful story about a small town,
Mm-hmm.
and the chapters, do y'all remember Spoon River Anthology? Did your teachers ever make
Yeah.
you read that?
Yeah.
It's sort of inspired and written at that same time, where each person, each chapter focuses on a member of the town, but there are so many kind of questions about faith and spirituality that I think you all would love. And it's beautiful. There's nothing uncomfortable. Well, maybe a couple things, but that's just literature. But it's not The Handmaid's Tale, I'll tell you that.
Oh,
Sue, I've only ever read his poetry, so it would be interesting to read some of that as well. And as you were
It's
talking, I thought to
beautiful.
myself, we could probably throw in a little bit of our town,
yeah.
there as well, because my hunch is that it's dealing with some of those similar kinds of things from that period. And it's also interesting, to think about, okay, in our own time and age, 100 years later, what's happening as things really shake up here. So that might be fun. So let's
beautiful.
think
I
about
think y'all
that,
would love it.
and maybe think about October. Yeah, because we're in the spring now. So I've already got, I think, the first couple of weeks of September kicked off, but maybe we could do late September going to October for that next year. Or I mean,
That's
later
great with
this
me.
year.
That's a book you all will love. There's
Okay.
nothing, you'll love it. It's beautiful. It's not hard to read. It's not postmodern. He's writing at the same time as Cather.
Don Schultze, have you read it before? No?
Oh my gosh, it's so great. All right.
I'm the one that I've always wanted to tackle, but I haven't, is the Sinclair Lewis
Babbitt,
Small Town, or
Main Street.
Main Street. Yeah. So I mean, we're hitting on a similar genre.
Yeah.
But Sue, thank you so much for taking us through.
I think we did this one together.
Yeah.
Because you all filled in lots of spaces. I am not. Although I know a lot about cowboys, I am no good in the Southwest.
Yeah.
Wait, that sounded maybe not good, but I meant the genre of the cowboy, of course.
I think we need to probably get Glenn Davidson to do some teaching for us at church when it's safe for him to come back, because he is certainly a font of knowledge about all of this in a way that
I
I'm not.
could not
yeah.
agree more. But you are all special and lovely.
Here, here.
All right, you
Sue,
guys,
thanks
I
so
love you.
much. We love you so much.
All right, and then I'll see you in the fall. Think about Winesburg.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
Grace
you.
and peace all.
Love y'all. Bye.